Every little media tidbit of President-elect Donald Trump's youngest son, Barron Trump, seems to send his fans into a tizzy. And one particular new clip has them going wild over an aspect of the 18-year-old they've never heard before.
Barron Trump, Kai Trump, and these other younger Trumps really are the next generation and the future of the Republican Party. If they want to be involved in politics at all, of course, it's a blood sport, it's a contact sport. They might have other interests. But Barron Trump, I think he's still young. He's still finding himself. I went to NYU as well, just like Barron Trump.
Let me help you to imagine this scenario. The soft, golden light of the afternoon glows on the White House. Barron receives a white envelope sealed with the emblem of the country's biggest TV network. His name is printed on it, pulling him into something he never asked for. This isn't just an interview, it's a challenge. The host, known for tough questions and sharp words, is ready to turn a simple conversation into a test. Will Barron handle the pressure, or will the heat be too much? Get ready for an exciting showdown on one of the most watched shows in America. Let's jump in. Advisors whispered quietly among themselves. The young heir to the president remained a mystery to the media, always private, always avoiding political headlines. But now, with his father back in the world's most powerful position, everyone was watching him. Doubt hung in the air. Would he agree? Barron, this might be a trap, an experienced advisor cautioned, his brow furrowed. But Barron just crossed his arms and smirked. Maybe it was time to prove he was more than just a famous last name. As night fell over Washington, Barron strolled through the garden of the presidential residence, deep in thought about his decision. He remembered a piece of advice his father gave him long ago. Never step into a fight unprepared, but don't back down just because it seems tough. The pressure was real, but this was not something he could ignore. This was bigger than politics or media criticism. It was not just about defending a name. It was about showing a part of himself no one had ever seen before. The next morning, as the city came to life, Barron sent his reply. One simple word: accepted. Across town, the host received the news with a sly grin. Perfect, he muttered, leaning against his glass desk, confident Barron would be an easy target. What he didn't realize was that underestimating the president's son might be his biggest mistake. The TV studio buzzed with activity. Producers dashed around, tweaking scripts, adjusting lights, and fine-tuning cameras. Amid the organized chaos, the host sat calmly, drumming his fingers on the desk as he reviewed the file in front of him. Barron Trump, the president's son. A sly smirk crossed his face as he imagined how the night would play out. Let's see what this kid's made of, he murmured, while his team finalized a carefully crafted list of questions. This was not just an interview, it was a spectacle, and Barron was the star of the show. Backstage, the tension was palpable as journalists and commentators gathered in hushed groups, eagerly discussing what was about to unfold. The air was thick with anticipation. Everyone knew this broadcast had the potential to be a game changer. This was not just any interview, it was political theater, cleverly disguised as entertainment. The stakes were high, and the room buzzed with a mix of excitement and nerves. Some journalists even placed bets, wagering on how Barron would handle the pressure. Would he crack under the heat of tough questions? Would he fumble over his words or fail to respond in the way they expected? These were the questions on everyone's mind. The plan for the evening was clear and well-rehearsed. Start with friendly banter, ease him into the conversation, and then gradually maneuver him into a corner. The hope was that at some point he would slip, say something controversial, or reveal a weakness that could be used to fuel the headlines for the coming week. The goal was simple: break him, make him the story. Meanwhile, in his private dressing room, Barron stood silently before the mirror, adjusting his perfectly tailored suit. His appearance was impeccable, sharp, polished, confident, but his face betrayed no sign of nervousness. Instead, his expression was focused and intense, his mind already prepared for what was to come. He knew exactly what the game was. This was not just an interview, it was a challenge. A test of both his composure and his ability to stay true to himself under intense scrutiny. He had grown up watching his father, Donald Trump, face endless media attacks, each one more relentless than the last. He had seen firsthand how his father managed to stay calm, cool, and collected, never letting the barrage of criticism affect his stance. Barron had learned from those experiences, not just by watching, but by understanding the subtle art of dealing with the media. His father's ability to deflect and stay composed had been his own form of resilience, a strategy that had worked for him time and again. But Barron was different. He was not looking to imitate his father's approach. He knew that he didn't need to be Donald Trump to succeed. He had his own style, his own way of navigating difficult situations. He was not here to fight in the same way his father had fought. Instead, he was here to show that he could handle the pressure on his terms. Calm, composed, and completely in control. And most importantly, he was ready. Ready for whatever questions they threw his way, ready to stay true to himself, and ready to handle the moment. This was his time to prove that he could rise above the game the media had set for him. Barron took a slow, deliberate breath, steadying himself as he gazed into the mirror. His fingers curled around the cool glass of water, his reflection staring back at him with an expression that was both confident and knowing. He could already sense the undercurrent of expectations swirling around the upcoming interview. They wanted drama, they wanted a spectacle, and Barron was prepared to give them exactly that, only not in the way they were hoping. His smirk was subtle, but filled with a quiet determination. They thought they had the upper hand, but he had other plans. The soft, muffled knock on the door brought him back to the present. 5 minutes, Mr. Trump, came the voice of the producer, breaking the stillness in the room. Barron nodded, setting the glass down on the vanity. He rose from his chair with the same calm and grace that had become second nature to him. Adjusting his tie in the mirror, he studied his reflection for a moment longer, then turned and walked to the door with measured steps. There was no rush, no sign of nerves, just the steady, assured rhythm of someone who knew exactly what was coming and was ready for it. As he stepped out into the hallway, the fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting a bright, artificial glow. The noise of the bustling studio crew echoed from a distance, but in this moment, it all felt distant to Barron. His focus was entirely on what lay ahead. The heavy buzz of the cameras and microphones, the distant hum of conversation from the other side of the studio doors, only seemed to heighten the anticipation in the air. The audience was already seated, their eager faces lit up with expectation. Barron walked down the hallway with a quiet confidence that was hard to ignore. Every step felt deliberate, every movement calculated. He passed by crew members who offered polite nods, but no one dared to disturb him. He could feel the weight of the moment building, but he was not fazed. He had been through enough press events to know that this was just another challenge. Only this time, he was not playing by the rules. Inside the studio, the cameras had already begun rolling, their mechanical hum a constant reminder that the world was about to watch. The host, poised and ready for his carefully planned ambush, didn't know what was coming. Barron could already sense it. The plan was in place, but it was all about to backfire. The host's focus was on pushing Barron into a corner, but what he didn't anticipate was the calm, unyielding presence that Barron brought with him. The studio lights above blazed brightly, casting harsh shadows across the set. The heat from them made the air feel thick and oppressive, but Barron barely noticed. The audience shuffled restlessly in their seats, their eyes darting around as they anticipated the clash that was about to unfold. The tension in the room was so thick it was almost tangible. Yet Barron remained composed, his eyes scanning the set as he made his way to his seat. The noise of the crowd faded as he approached the center stage, the world seeming to slow down around him. In that moment, he was not just walking into a studio, he was walking into the storm with an unwavering calm, ready to face whatever challenge the host had prepared. The host shuffled his notes with practiced ease, the faintest flicker of impatience passing through his eyes as he adjusted the papers, masking his emotions with a polished, professional smile. Every movement was deliberate, part of the show. The stage was set, the cameras were rolling, and the audience was waiting. The game was about to begin, and the host was determined to control every aspect of it, from the tone of his voice to the direction of the conversation. He glanced at the cameras once more, ensuring the moment was captured perfectly before turning to address the audience. With a flourish, he announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we're joined by a very special guest, straight from the White House, Barron Trump." The words hung in the air as the crowd erupted into applause, the sound filling the studio with energy. But beneath the surface of genuine excitement, there were whispers, some excited and welcoming, others filled with skepticism and doubt. This was not just an ordinary interview, it was something far more intense. It was a spectacle, a high-stakes performance with layers of meaning waiting to unfold. People were eager to see how Barron would handle the pressure, what he would say, and how he would respond to the barrage of questions that were inevitably coming his way. Barron entered the stage with a calm, controlled demeanor, moving deliberately as if every step was part of a plan. His posture was perfect and his gaze unwavering. When he reached the host, his handshake was firm and confident, signaling that he was in control. Though outwardly calm, he knew the real game had started long before the cameras rolled. Behind the scenes, the media was preparing for a confrontation, and Barron was fully aware that this interview was just another strategic move in a carefully planned chess match. "It's a pleasure to have you here, Barron," the host said, his tone polite, but with the faintest undertone of something else. A subtle challenge buried beneath the surface. "After all, it's not every day we hear from someone like you, a young man raised in the shadow of power." The words, disguised as a compliment, were a veiled jab at Barron's upbringing. The host was trying to undermine him without directly confronting him, using flattery to mask the underlying critique. The subtle jab was meant to provoke a reaction, to rattle Barron and force him into a defensive position. But Barron, ever composed, didn't take the bait. He simply smiled, the corners of his lips lifting slightly as he met the host's gaze. In that smile was a quiet acknowledgement of the game being played, but also a silent declaration that he was not going to play by their rules. The interview had just begun, but the battle for control was already unfolding. The host leaned in, subtly adjusting his posture to create an atmosphere of familiarity and ease, keeping his tone casual, almost friendly. He was not going to let Barron off the hook so easily. "You know, a lot of people are curious, what's it like being the son of such a, let's say, controversial president?" The audience laughed at the host's playful phrasing, their eyes fixed on Barron, eager to see how he would react. The question was designed to provoke, to force Barron to acknowledge the weight of his father's reputation. It was a challenge, a way to get him to squirm, to show a crack in his polished exterior. It was the host's way of testing the young man, pushing him into a corner and hoping to see him falter. But Barron didn't flinch. He remained unmoved, as if the question hadn't affected him in the slightest. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, his expression still calm and composed, like a man who had faced far more challenging situations than this one. After a brief pause, he replied with calm precision, his voice steady and unwavering. "I think growing up under public scrutiny teaches you a lot about character. If people are talking about you, it means you've done something worth noticing." The words were simple, yet profound, each one delivered with an air of quiet confidence. It was a response that didn't just deflect the question, it turned it into something else entirely. It was as if Barron was telling the audience that the criticism, the controversy, and the attention were all just noise, and he was above it. To him, it was all part of the journey. For a brief moment, the host's confident smirk faltered. He was not expecting such a composed, thoughtful answer. He had hoped for a stumble, a sign of vulnerability, but instead, he had met a wall of calm, unshakable resolve. It was clear that Barron wasn't going to be the easy target he had assumed. The host's gaze shifted, and in that split second, his smug confidence wavered, just enough for anyone paying attention to notice. But the host wasn't ready to give up just yet. This was just the opening act, a simple jab to test the waters. He wasn't about to let the conversation slip away from him so easily. No, the real challenge was still ahead. He had prepared for a confrontation, for a moment of weakness to exploit, and he was determined to find it. But Barron was not giving him that satisfaction. Instead, the stakes were rising, and the host knew the true battle was only just beginning. "Interesting," the host said, regaining his composure. "But tell me, Barron, do you truly believe your family understands the struggles of everyday Americans? After all, your life has been one of privilege, hasn't it?" The trap was set. The goal was clear: to paint Barron as someone disconnected from ordinary people. The audience sat in silence, waiting to see how he would respond. But Barron didn't flinch. He understood exactly what was happening. The question about privilege was a classic tactic, designed to frame him as out of touch. Barron, however, was ready. Barron locked eyes with the host, letting the silence stretch out for a few moments, allowing the weight of the question to settle. With his calm demeanor unwavering, he leaned forward just enough to make his point clear, then coolly asked, "Have you ever asked that question to the children of other presidents? Or is it just me?" The words were deliberate, a subtle yet sharp challenge to the host's assumption. The quiet confidence in his voice suggested he was not just answering, he was turning the tables. The reaction was instant. The audience murmured, and a few even chuckled quietly. The host hadn't anticipated being put on the spot so soon, and certainly not like this. He blinked quickly, trying to regain control. "Well, I just think the public wants to know if you truly understand the struggles of the average American," he said, attempting to steer the conversation back. Barron could sense the change in the atmosphere almost instantly. The tension in the room grew thicker, the audience unsure of how to react. He smiled, not in a way that came off as smug, but with the steady, assured confidence of someone who had just taken control of the narrative. It was the kind of smile that said he knew exactly what he was doing, and he was not going to be easily rattled. The host, caught off guard, could feel the ground shifting beneath him. "Understanding hardship doesn't always come from personal experience," Barron said. "It comes from empathy. If someone truly wants to make the world better, they should start by listening, not judging." A moment of silence filled the room before a single clap broke the tension. Soon, more claps followed, and the audience began to applaud in unison, showing their approval. Barron had shifted the energy in the room, turning the atmosphere in his favor. The host clasped his hands, realizing he'd need a different approach. "All right, Barron, since we're talking about challenges, your father was recently re-elected, but many believe his administration continues to divide the country. Do you think it's fair for your family to make decisions that affect millions without considering every voice?" The question was heavier this time. The host aimed to corner Barron, forcing him to either defend or criticize his father's leadership. But Barron stayed calm, unshaken by the pressure. "If there's division," Barron began, his voice steady, "it's because some people prefer to label others instead of having real conversations. My father was elected by the American people, which means millions of voices believe in him. What's interesting is that those who claim to want unity are often the ones working hardest to silence those with different opinions." The audience reacted immediately. Some clapped, while others sat quietly, stunned by his response. The host clenched his jaw, realizing for the first time that this wasn't just an interview with the son of a political leader, he was up against someone completely prepared for the moment. Crossing his arms, the host felt the tension rising. He had planned to back Barron into a corner with tough questions, but now he was the one looking uneasy. The young man wasn't just answering with smarts, He was exposing the hypocrisy behind the questions. This wasn't going the way the host had planned. The strategy to put Barron on the defensive was falling apart, and the audience was starting to notice. Some whispered to each other, while others exchanged knowing looks. The game had shifted. Desperate to regain control, the host played what he thought was his strongest move. But Barron, let's be honest, your last name has opened doors for you that most people will never have. Do you really think you can talk about merit and hard work when you were born into wealth and influence? It was a direct attack, designed to provoke him. A low blow, but a calculated one. The aim was clear. Get Barron to react emotionally, to make him falter just enough to create a headline. But Barron didn't bite. Instead, he leaned back slightly, took a calm breath, and responded with sharp precision. Have you noticed that your whole strategy is about discrediting someone just because of their last name? It's funny how that kind of judgment is only unacceptable when it's convenient. The studio went quiet for a moment before murmurs and scattered applause filled the air. The host shifted uncomfortably in his chair, trying to hide his discomfort, but the damage had been done. Barron had completely turned the tables, and everyone could see it. For the first time, the host's expression stiffened as he realized he was losing control of the interview. Barron wasn't falling apart or backing down. He was calmly tearing apart every attempt to undermine him. And the worst part for the host? The audience was starting to notice. What was meant to be a carefully planned takedown had turned into something entirely different, and the real turning point was still to come. The host could feel the tension building in the studio, knowing millions were watching as things unfolded. Every trap he set for Barron had failed. The young man, without raising his voice or showing any anger, had systematically countered each question thrown at him. This was not how things were supposed to go. The expectation was that Barron would mess up, maybe even snap. Instead, he stayed calm and collected, putting the host in an unfamiliar and uncomfortable position, being outmatched and struggling for a way out. The host made one last desperate attempt. You say you don't care about critics, but your father's administration has been accused of dividing America. How do you respond to that? Do you really believe your family is doing what's best for everyone? This was the key moment. If Barron made even the slightest mistake here, the host could still save the interview. The question was loaded, meant to either get Barron to admit to division or come across as disconnected from reality. The audience waited, holding their breath, but Barron didn't flinch. He looked directly into the camera, his face steady, with a calmness that spoke louder than any fiery reply. He responded with precision. Division doesn't come from who's in power. It comes from the belief that anyone who thinks differently should be ridiculed, silenced, or cancelled. The real issue isn't leadership. It's a culture where disagreement is seen as an unforgivable offense. A thick silence followed. The host had no reply. His entire argument fell apart right in front of millions. He opened his mouth but couldn't find the words. There was nothing he could say that wouldn't make Barron's point even clearer. The audience, the viewers at home, and the producers behind the cameras all understood. This was more than just a moment in an interview. It was a turning point. It would be discussed, replayed, and analyzed for days to come. The host forced a smile, but it no longer carried the confidence it had at the start of the interview. The host realized he had lost the battle, but Barron stayed calm, showing no arrogance or need to boast. He didn't have to. He wasn't trying to win. He simply refused to be manipulated, letting the truth speak for itself. As the interview came to an end, the host, clearly unsettled, forced a handshake. "Thank you for being here, Barron. This was interesting." But everyone in the studio knew this wasn't just an interview, it was a public defeat. Backstage, the producers exchanged nervous looks. Some whispered quietly, trying to process what had just happened. The plan had completely backfired. Instead of embarrassing Barron Trump, they had given him a chance to showcase his intelligence, composure, and ability to stand firm. Meanwhile, social media went wild. Clips of the interview spread rapidly with headlines like, Barron Trump turns the tables and exposes media hypocrisy live on air, and the moment a TV host realized he picked the wrong opponent. Other headlines read, "The youngest Trump just proved he's a force to be reckoned with." As for Barron, he left the studio unaffected by the online chaos. He hadn't come to make a statement or change anyone's mind. He simply refused to let others define him based on their assumptions. He didn't seek attention, but that night, the world saw him for who he really was: sharp, composed, and much more prepared than anyone had thought. The next morning, as the news outlets kept analyzing the interview, Barron watched quietly from afar, sipping his coffee in silence. The battle may have been won, but this is just the start. More challenges, more eyes. But one thing's for sure, no one will ever underestimate him again. If this story resonated with you, we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Share how this journey of strength and change made an impact on you. Make sure to give a thumbs up so this important message can reach even more people. And thanks for being part of our community. Together, we can spread more hope around the world.